thing on this screen. It's the meeting. Stop. Meeting. Hello?
Test. Test, test.
Test. Think so. Test, test. Does that sound better?
That work?
Okay. Get a moose? Did you get a deer?
I didn't get a moose. I did get a deer like that. Yeah.
My husband does, and he's not thoroughly pleased with me because there was one in the backyard the other day and he goes, oh, when he's got the binoculars out and he's looking, and I fly open the window. Can't catch me.
That is awesome.
She'd take off, he'd look at me, you're real helpful. You're welcome.
So all these communications that we're getting from Sierra, a couple of Sierra.
Yeah, that's why I got
Did you have a moose permit too?
it. Did,
Okay.
Yeah, so it was a lot of fun. We went, and we saw a bunch of moose,
Okay.
which is not quite one.
Okay. Right?
Yeah, right.
I'll take moose meat over deer meat any day. Hello.
We did not sign it, plenty of signage.
No,
No, Michael, I'm not part of the planning board, but we heard that we were discussing Airbnbs tonight.
Oh, where'd my table go?
The agenda, we're actually not discussing.
Oh, you're not?
Well, we got an inquiry. So at the very end of the meeting, I'm gonna read that
Okay,
communication. This is the agenda.
because we got a draft. For, how to accommodate Airbnbs, and we should have,
Just that last,
okay,
and we're here.
I was not here.
Yeah, we, tabled it and went back to the select board.
okay,
And I think the discussion for it should be policy.
okay.
So my intention, I'm not the chair, you're the chair.
Yeah.
I thought, as a secretary, I got a communication about Matt St. Cyrs' thoughts on the draft that had been floating around.
Okay,
So I was gonna forward that to say we got it, we did, and I'll report, I don't know, you can stay, but you'll be here for a couple hours.
okay, all right,
I mean, there's no
yeah,
reason. And it's also, it's not a live recording, you can see the recording
okay,
to see what we said.
okay.
Um,
Well, I read the draft, and basically, we are completely fine with it. There is just one little, accommodation or something that we would request, and that is that existing Airbnbs are not forced to basically abandon everything in order to obtain the permit. But because when you are listed on Airbnb, it takes a while for that system to recognize you. And then you work your way up kind of, and you establish yourself on that website. So to basically give all of that up would be kind of a big deal.
Well, whatever happens, whether it's an ordinance or policy, there will be at least 2 public hearings where the public will come, give comment.
Okay,
And that is an opportunity to reshape the wording, and if it's reshaped, then there's another 2 public hearings. So
yeah,
this is, it will be a very public process,
okay,
and, watching, I guess, I would watch the agenda for the select board, because we'll go back to them.
okay. All right, okay. That's wonderful. Well, you've given us a free evening, so.
Enjoy yourself.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for what you're doing for the town. Appreciate it. Thank you.
I have an invitation for February, so that's where we go.
Have a good night. Thank you.
So, hopefully, it's taken on. So that. People.
Yeah.
Have you.
Yeah.
Something. I don't think it's okay that they don't listen to anything.
No, that's not even. There it is.
Hey, it's not a forum.
Hello.
I think it's really.
So I can always blame somebody else. Yeah.
Oh, you're all set to go. I don't need to.
We tried.
I think we got.
You got it. Good. I'll get out of here then.
I mean, you're a little complicated. No, I haven't. Technology. Oh. Place. This is recording.
She's not going through those changes, where she's got all these different flashes, so, it's gonna be too long.
Better be careful.
It's like, oh, I'm very sympathetic to her, it's like. Just tell her you shouldn't eat that.
You shouldn't do what?
She shouldn't eat that.
Eat the apple, right, it's all over.
That child life.
She often asks why she keeps being around.
I tell my husband he can put on a sweatshirt.
Thanks. Used to be when I was young. That was one thing. It didn't say it's hard. No, it's not. I wouldn't say it was. I would appreciate it.
Yeah. Are we discussing the Airbnb ordinance tonight? Is that,
No.
we're not,
I heard that there was a rumor about this non-confiscated.
You're not mad.
no,
So this is the agenda, and we did get, we discussed it last month.
Yeah.
And it's going back to the select board, all I'm gonna do is read a comment that I received in the mail,
You,
so.
Okay.
this is all we're talking for.
And it was on the meeting for tonight. We got pulled.
No,
When's he gonna read
there's never, this is the agenda, this is the agenda, it's a conservation subdivision ordinance and subdivision. So I think.
I'm about ready.
Your,
Yeah, he's a really good guy.
your second person's gonna, what we're discussing.
Yeah.
The agenda is on the board, so.
okay, yeah, because I thought it was on the agenda.
It was last month's.
Oh.
Last month's, and.
Only one
just so
set,
you
that's
know,
normal surgery.
whatever happens,
Yeah,
there's
you
gonna
can
be
do
these
it.
two hearings, but not much for the public, so. It's
Yeah.
not, there's plenty of opportunity. for
Okay.
to
talk about it.
Yeah.
Right, right, and it should be advertised, so it's going back to the select board, or once there, comes back to us once. Then we kind of take.
Okay.
And are you looking for Airbnb financial?
I do your thing like around small.
Because we're not discussing it tonight.
Yeah.
Are you mad?
Nope.
I keep wondering.
I'm scared. Yeah.
So, I mean, you're welcome to stay and watch the mountains.
Yeah. I think it's today.
Yeah.
If you're gonna.
No, it was that.
Yes. Around there, you see.
I think it's better.
Anything that briefly.
I'm not, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's recording, not recording.
It's recording?
Yeah, it says it's not recording. No, it was recording, that's why she turned it off.
Yeah.
Okay, good evening. I'm gonna call this planning board meeting to order. Remember that we are recording. If you are a planning board member, please turn your microphone on if you wish to speak. And if you're a member of the public and you wish to speak, please come to the microphone and state your name, your address, and then you're free to go. So I'm gonna turn it over to our acting co-chair, Todd Mellon.
So the first order of business would be the secretary's report. Yes.
We have a quorum, so we can proceed. I have prepared meetings from October 16th meeting, which we, since I wrote them, I didn't edit them. So I guess I would move that we accept the minutes as written here. And if anybody has changes, we can.
I didn't have any changes. I move that we accept the meeting minutes for the October 16th, 2024 meeting as written.
Second.
All in favor? It doesn't look like we have any old business. So we can move on to the new business that we have listed and start with the amendment to the conservation subdivision ordinance. So Tom, if you want to take over, okay, let's talk about that.
Good evening, board. The members should have already received from Marcia a copy of a first draft of a new ordinance that speaks to workforce and affordable housing mandates from the state of Maine. As all of you recall, in 2022, the legislature began its discussions on LD 2003 for affordable housing. There was a timeline that was extended to July of this year that all municipalities needed to comply with that state mandate, pardon me, for affordable housing. So we dug deep and searched for a possible solution to how do we make adjustments to the zoning ordinance to comply with state law, of which there are multiple state laws. And I think hopefully tonight we can bring some clarity to the confusion that may exist on what's now allowable densities, even though an ordinance may say you're allowed one home. In some situations, you're allowed through ADUs, accessory dwelling units, one additional home with prescribed square footage requirements. So if questions do surface tonight from board members, I'd like to make sure we clear that up because we did get a memorandum from Brian, and I'd like to clear up a bit later the difference between when do you have the occasion for a one permitted residential unit plus one. That would be your ADU. When you're speaking to the mandate as prescribed by the state legislature, it allows up a density up to 2.5 in terms of allowable density per lot or per residential unit existing or permitted. So the memorandum that I sent out to the board speaks to what may be the town's one saving grace to providing both workforce housing and affordable housing, but keeping it in a context of smart site planning. One of the dilemmas when the state created this piece of legislation, they allowed it per right anywhere in any residential zone, anywhere in the state. More targeted, I believe, for urban and suburban areas, but not for areas of a rural nature like Pownell. And so I dug deep and had conversations with staff and the select board with what are possible solutions that make sense and can provide smart site planning and still achieve the goal. And what I'm recommending to the board is that the board, using the guidelines set forth by both the feds and the state, it's very prescribed which your maximum densities are allowed. But in our case, to prescribe them to our conservation zone, our conservation subdivision opportunities, of which no one has utilize that. It's a relatively new ordinance. It's, without saying complicated, and has many challenges within it. I saw that this may be your golden egg to provide both good conservation planning, good ecological planning, good smart site planning, and achieve the affordable mandate that's set forth by the state. One of the prescriptions to that is the fact that there's a minimum tract size. And so within that minimum tract size, which was, I think, very thoughtfully put together, without that, I probably wouldn't be recommending this tonight. But when you have that amount of land, which always has physical constraints and physical opportunities, it allows for much more flexibility in design. It allows you to, in some cases, build deeper into the forest, preserve more of the ruralness from the road, but yet still be able to achieve mixed residential uses. And I think a conservation subdivision provides for that. It provides the opportunity where, of course, it's all based on the physicality of the site. But if that site has opportunities with good soils and good water, where both affordable workforce housing could be situated, as well as the other economic stratas of housing that currently are being built. I think it's achievable. As I have mentioned in the past, one of my planning goals for the community, one of the reasons I took this job was to see if we could create a poster child conservation subdivision that would set the standard, not just for the community, but set the standard for the state because of the uniqueness of that ordinance. It's truly unique. And the stringency of the state mandates. And so what I've attempted to do here, as simple as I possibly could, was to gel this together so that it had functionality. One of the challenges is the nomenclature that the state uses, of which they don't define. They use words that they don't define in growth areas or growth center areas, of which the town has not defined where those are. But it's becoming very apparent from a planning perspective on large tracts of land where the growth is going to happen on a larger scale. So here's my suggestion that you look this over, ask a lot of questions, and see how we might be able to merge together a thoughtful approach to planning, but at the same time, get ahead of the 8 ball, if you will, with what I anticipate will be more mandates coming down from Augusta. I'll leave it there. Ryan?
So, I mean, yeah, I think this could be a good vehicle to fulfilling state and federal requirements. And correct me if I'm wrong, but if you could do a density of 5 units, let's say, somebody had a parcel of land and it was 10 acres and they could hypothetically put 5 units in, saying you have a 2.5 affordable housing density bonus does not mean that they can suddenly put 12 or 13 lots in. Those lots still have to conform with the requirements of the conservation subdivision. Like you said, minimum lot size, and we have rules about putting in, conserving a certain percentage of land. I don't know, I don't know if some of the road language is still a limiting factor or not. I mean, we'd have to discuss through some of these, but to quell people's concerns that suddenly we're going to see a massive amount of development if we adopt this, is not necessarily the case, and we still have guardrails of our own rules about septic and, you know, and how small lot size can be that will still limit growth. And the other piece of it is that, you know, we've seen other cities like Portland try to do things like inclusionary zoning. And what they've found is that actually, in order to, it may not actually be, even if they tried to build 51% of the units that's affordable, it still may not pencil out. So even if we did this option, it's not even guaranteed that anybody would do it, because building is expensive nowadays, and to build, you know, 7 affordable housing units or whatnot is a challenge to do in this economy.
Would you like me to respond?
Yeah. Correct me if anything I said was wrong, or if you have a different take or want to add on to that.
Well, it was quite a soliloquy of ideas, and I'll respond to the ones that I think are the real highlights.
Yeah.
And keyword is guardrails. You know, are there guardrails? Again, I want you to know as board members, and I want the public to know that my mission is to create a poster child conservation subdivision. And you're going to get sick of hearing me say that, but we have to, because it's the first one, and it sets the standards for any other future ones. There are a goodly number of very large land holdings in this community that will be going through generational change in the next 5 to 10 years. And that's why it's so critical to get it right the first time out. So how does that apply to the guardrails? The ordinance in its current construct has quite a few guardrails. Some of them actually conflictual now with state law. So over time, some of those things we'll have to make adjustments to. But the greater guardrail is the physicality of the site, the soils. And from pure, the other point is economics. To make economics work on any of these large scale type of subdivisions, and by large scale, I mean large acreage. I don't necessarily mean large density. That the soil suitability and the availability of water are the controlling factors. And with those controlling factors, there'll be situations where builders won't be able to build out at 2.5. It might be 1.8, it might, you know, rounding off, just because of the physicality of the site. And then your dimensional criterion would also affect that. So I have a fair degree of comfort with the ordinance and the current guardrails. If anything, I think we'll find some conflictual language in the existing ordinance and the state mandates that'll need to be remedied over time. But we need a starting place. This is your safest starting place rather than a carte blanche across the whole community. Most communities, cities and otherwise, have just given a carte blanche. Yeah. And I think it's led to some very unfortunate forms of housing.
Well, I agree with you that the way we set up the conservation subdivision is that there is a lot of, in some ways, back and forth and looking at the site of the land and what is the best way to set this up for the site of the land. And so that is a positive for incorporating the density bonus into this, because we do have these guardrails with septic and lot size, and we have more of a collaborative process set up for this, so that if more houses are being put in, it's not just gonna be a total mess. There'll be more of a back and forth about what really the land, what is the capacity of the land and what is the capacity for the town and what is the needs of the developer.
And there's the untalked about variables of some developments, let's just say in this county, have made pastures of woodland. And that doesn't allow for good site planning. Some developments in this county or this state don't use curvilinear roads. The fastest, easiest, and shortest way in is the most economic. That doesn't make for good site planning. So when we hopefully have our first conservation subdivision, we all need to build as much creativity into it as possible, where deeper than normal setbacks, preservation of more old generation growth as a buffer between. I think we'll find that really integral to creating a true conservation subdivision. And at the same time, here we're trying to accomplish a lot of goals all at once. But because we're now approaching 6 months overdue, if you will, in compliance. Now, some people would argue too, well, let's not comply and let's just wait it out until somebody brings us to court. I would suggest that there's ways to avoid that and try it on a very small scale. You don't see a lot of people knocking the doors down to do conservation subdivisions. We've had maybe 2 or 3 people explore the possibility. I believe all of which have discovered, wow, the economics of this don't make sense. So now this might add to that formula. And it's a very complex formula. So you hit all the key points, Orion, economics, guardrails, and the sciences that have to go into the review.
Tom, I do have a few questions. I'm not too sure that I understand everything that's happening. So I'm gonna kind of I'm hoping we could take a step back. So number one, this all has to do with getting the town into compliance for LD 2003. Is that correct? That's correct. Number two.
May I put a caveat to that?
Yeah, for sure.
Some people would argue, well, we don't have to. We don't have a growth area.
Well, that's my next question well, I've got a ton of questions. Number one, when I was looking at one of the main websites, it did have a map with the listed growth areas, and we don't have one. So in that sense, do we actually need to do this if we don't even, well, my first question is, are you only required to comply with 2003 if you have a growth area? Just by the nature of the.
Can we put it in a medical context, you being a doctor? There's 2 types of medicine. There's the abscess and then there's the preventative medicine, okay? And what we're doing here is preventative medicine, looking ahead, but at the same time, providing for a huge need that is out there across the state. For the next generation, we're looking at, how do we build this opportunity for the next generation? And I think we're also looking ahead, I'm looking ahead at those big tracts of land that I think will all be, or not all, but some will be on the market within the next 3 to 5 to 10 years because they're changing generations. And there's some pretty huge tracts in town, 100 acres here, 200 there, 400 there. And we need to be very mindful of how do we protect the integrity of that site, and how do we encourage people to go to conservation subdivisions. So the caveat is, some people would argue, you don't have to do anything with it. You don't have a growth center. Okay? I would argue that you do have growth centers, they're just not on paper. Okay? But when you look around and you find where these are located, and they're, you can pretty well pinpoint the roads that they'll be on. So the second thing is, people might argue because of the vagueness of the state legislation and how poorly it's written, that well, we don't have public sewer and we don't have public water. That's really a non-issue because we have water in certain areas, and they might indeed be in some of these large tract areas. And we do have areas of significantly suitable soils. So what can be achieved on an engineered subsurface system might be even easier to achieve than 50 separate subsurface septic tank fields. So my point is preventative medicine. We're looking ahead, but it could be, and in fairness to all those out there who say, we don't have to do it because we don't have a growth center. Does that answer it? Or did I dance around it too much?
No, it did, John, did you have?
Can I just?
Yeah, yeah, please.
Tom and I have been talking about it. It's specifically because we don't have a growth center. This is an opportunity to do this. If there were a growth center, we wouldn't have the leeway in order to try to incorporate affordable housing into the conservation subdivision. But because we don't have it, that gives us the time and latitude to try to fit it in so that if we were to consider, and I'm trying to be really loose here, our responsibility towards, let's say, Pownell residents and affordable housing and all that entails there, at least we have made a good faith effort to try to address that sort of basic premise that we're trying to take care of whatever demographic that is going to be included in workforce affordable housing, especially for Pownell. But it's because we don't have that we, Tom and I have talked about, isn't this a good opportunity just to try to make it?
Okay, that actually, that makes a lot more sense to me. So it's, we're doing it because the goal would be to provide for some opportunity for affordable housing in the town.
Yeah.
Okay.
On that kind of, I mean, we talked about the comprehensive plan, and comprehensive plan does mention housing affordability. We haven't really, we've talked around the idea of it, but we haven't actually done anything as far as I can recall about housing affordability. So this is potentially not just a way to address, you know, what are state and federal concerns, but also what, you know, the town kind of has directed us to think about of how do we address housing affordability in a rural community? And maybe this is one way that we can say we're doing our part. And you know, the people who historically lived in Pownell were not the wealthiest individuals in the state. And we want to be a community that's welcoming to that workforce that traditionally lived in this community.
So that would bring me kind of to my next questions is, reading this, I'm not clear on how that would actually happen. So number one, if just looking at it from a density perspective, what is 2.5 times the base density? If we have this subdivision, this conservation subdivision, and we're already limiting the amount of units that can be built, if a developer is coming in and they're going to be providing affordable housing, does that mean they can then build? And I know you kind of touched on it, but I can't wrap my head around it. Does that mean that they can literally build 2.5 times the amount of housing that is permitted by the subdivision, or how does that work exactly?
excellent question. The answer to that is no. It does not allow the 2.5 times the max out density for the entire site based on all the current dimensional criterion. What it means is 2.5 of the workforce, or, and I'm going to use the terms interchangeably, a workforce housing or affordable housing, either or, same thing, meeting the criteria that's set forth in the HUD guidelines. The burden of proof is on the applicant to prove that they can meet those standards, okay? Because that's the formula. That's the only formula. It's a formula we can't change. The feds can change it, the state can change it, but we can't. But it's only for that segment of the subdivision.
So what would that look like in the real world? What would that kind of, what would that?
If, let's say it's a 100-acre site and the intention is to, with a complete build out of 80 units total, and 20 of those units are
But that wouldn't be,
affordable.
that's not something that would be allowed under current
on
ordinances.
100 acres, it may or may not, because you have other factors that come into play by state mandate.
Would be like, I think under the current thing, in 100 acres, maybe if you were looking at the 2-acre lot side, then potentially you could have 50
You have
units
to back out your open
hypothetically.
space.
Potential, yeah, but then there's still limiting factors that we have incorporated into.
Well, and so that's kind of,
So it's difficult, Todd, to hypothesize that because there are all these variables. Good soils, poor soils, water, backing out open space, frontage, amount of linear frontage, setbacks, type of housing. A applicant may choose to say, I'll do 10% affordable workforce housing, but my other 90% of the total on the remaining land after I've backed out the open space is going to be for 7-digit type housing. You see
They
what I'm
wouldn't get a
saying?
density bonus then.
Yeah, they would not get a density.
Only
bonus.
if they did half,
Which-
more than half of the units would have to be affordable for them to get any density bonus
But
at
you
all.
see, this, it's again, it's a matter of economic scale. When an applicant is on a conservation subdivision, it's probably gonna take a year to year and a half to get the approvals both at the state and the local level, depending on the scale of the project. And so it's likely that any larger project will be phased, and one might, and again, just, I'm only hypothesizing that someone might say, I'll do my affordable housing first. And then I'm gonna, after those roads are built, I'm gonna start then going into my other, or vice versa.
Yeah.
It's gonna almost become a contract between the town and the planning board and the applicant as to how things are phased, how much of it's being done. But the beauty of it is in the construct of the ordinance, in the very beginning of the ordinance, it talks about that whole conceptualization. So you can see the big picture up front, and that's critical.
Yeah.
That's really critical so that you see what the whole is, not piecemeal, what it's gonna look like. But it may not always, I can't think of anyone that would do on a large scale conservation subdivision, just all affordable housing. It's
Well,
gonna be, end up being a mix.
It's basically, my understanding, it would be basically impossible to actually hit the 2.5 density bonus. If you had a 10-acre piece of land as an example, we are already saying the ordinance, you have 5 acres you have to conserve. So then, and we're saying a minimum lot size of 1/2 acre. So even if they had the perfect piece of land, which we have all these other limiting factors of septic and all these other limiting factors, they could only get 10 units onto it. They would not be able to get a 2.5 density units. And 6 of those units out of the 10 would have to be affordable housing to even be able to build that number of units. So,
Ryan, it's purely situational.
yeah,
And it's driven by the whole amount of acreage. 100-acre site versus a 200-acre site changes the economy of scale. And so we'll have to, that part we have to wait and see because we don't know where the first conservation subdivision will be. But given the requirements of it currently, without this, the economy of scale has to be a huge tract of land in order to make the numbers work.
But even, and again, Ryan's kind of making the point that I've been trying to make is even if it's a huge tract of land, there's limitations to what that person can build according to the ordinance. So if our real goal is to find a way to provide affordable housing, I'm not sure that this actually achieves the goal. It says that we allow for it, but in reality, I don't see how it's actually gonna provide what we're really hoping to provide. So when I look at this, if I could see an example where this would provide an opportunity for a builder to build affordable housing, this would make sense, but I haven't been able to put it together in my head. And so it's just basically
yeah.
fluff.
I actually kind of agree with Todd. When I looked at this, my thought was basically it's almost on paper saying we're allowing a density bonus affordable housing, but it's potentially so challenging to meet that it's likely that we'll very rarely even get 1 or 2 projects in the next 10 years that could possibly do this. And so it may be good in some ways to pass something like this to comply with state rules, but if we actually want to do an affordable housing density bonus, you know, we should probably discuss like, okay, if the smaller lot size of you have a 20-acre lot and they could hypothetically build 10 units, if they build a third of them as affordable, then we give them 2 extra units. They're not getting a 2.5 density bonus, but like we actually create our own affordable density bonus that's outside of this that we think is actually practicable for developers to use, while this 2.5 density bonus with half the units being affordable housing is likely not really to be used at all or rarely at all. Yeah.
First of all, we should be doing this, definitely. There's a need for affordable housing. And especially in Pownell, I was reading the law. It's interesting. It said that the municipality should seek to achieve a level of at least 10% of new residential development based on 5-year historical average to meet the definition of affordable housing. So that's quite an ambitious number of houses. And I think it's great that we're starting the conversation, but could we even broaden this to include all subdivisions? Or is there another way that we can foresee the need for affordable, well, we know we need affordable housing. How can we help facilitate the construction of those affordable housing? It might not be the conservation subdivision. There might be another way, but we're starting the conversation and maybe it should be, I can't imagine affordable housing being built on a single lot. It can't be. So it would have to be some subdivision. So I guess that's right. That there might be a better way to do this that encompasses all future development.
There might be a complementary way of doing it in addition to. land planning is not the same as you remember it 10 years ago or 5 years ago or 3 years ago because of what the state has mandated. Caveat, there's a big caveat emptor in there. Beware what's coming. There is a lot more legislation coming. Again, I would suggest it's better to be ahead of the curve than behind it. But on Marcia's point, is there a better / complementary way of doing it? There are. However, they're driven by infrastructure. And it's inevitable that you'll see change in the center of town here in the very near future because of generational change. That change is going to happen maybe within a month, a year, but it's coming, and it can either be driven by public infrastructure or it can be challenged by infrastructure. And I'm going to weave this into it because it's an ongoing investigation that we're doing. The town took the initiative to do exploratory well drilling. The findings of that study will be forthcoming very soon. Should the town elect to take it to the next step, assuming the findings are positive, then a growth center would indeed be the center of town, and it would provide for different types of housing because of the very fact that you have public infrastructure, ergo water. Water is your huge asset now, or could be. So the dilemma with that, to respond to Marcia's approach to, is there a better way? Boy, it would be great just to put all our focus right in the center of town, but that's years away. And it doesn't solve the problem, the current one, and my fear that other mandates will be coming down from Augusta, and we want to do preventative medicine. But that will be, I believe, from a planner's perspective, your second area of growth that you'll be looking at, and it's a natural. I'm a newbie here in town, but I can already name 4 huge generational changes within 2,000 feet of here.
Can I ask you a question along that line? So I know it's the comprehensive plan that designates a growth area, but can the town de facto designate a growth area once we get the infrastructure information?
Purely based on infrastructure, even without definition, it may happen organically, just because it's got good soils and a high GPM. So, yeah, but we're almost at the point, it's kind of scary, where certain segments of the comprehensive plan should be updated because of all the changes that happened in Augusta. For example, the housing component needs to be looked at again and refreshed. It's left brain, right brain. It's got some great goals. Some of the best goals I've seen in a comprehensive plan.
Well, I don't know about updating the comprehensive plan. I think the comprehensive plan.
I didn't say that.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Let me say it once more. Taking a component that's critical because there's been so much change outside of the community. No. You're not going to update the whole comprehensive plan, but comprehensive plans should be constantly updated. And as one chapter gets tired and needs to be refreshed because of outside forces, then you take another look at it. And my suggestion, one is housing and another is infrastructure, because those are the 2 things that are changing rapidly. But that, to answer your question, Marcia, that growth center can happen in a formal way through the comp plan and town meeting. Or it will happen just organically by virtue of someone doing a large subdivision. It'll become the growth center.
Okay. I do have one more, hopefully, quick question that I really can't seem to wrap my head around is I get affordability when it comes to rental units. You can set the rent and it can be affordable. I don't really understand how something that's for sale can be affordable. Doesn't the market dictate the price? And what would affordable be? You know, one day it might be affordable and then in 3 months, the cost of that piece of property might be double or go up significantly depending on the market. So I mean, it's not gonna be affordable forever. It'll be affordable at the time it's built, and then whatever the market says it is what it is. How exactly does that work?
Great question, Todd. That is a huge moving target. It's moving as we speak. I'll use myself as an illustration. When I took this job, I said, I'm gonna buy a piece of real estate. I'm gonna build my small, not a tiny house, John, but a small house right here in Pownell. What a perfect place to build my home. So I did my land search, found out that I couldn't find the piece of land that I wanted for under $500,000. And then I looked at my pro forma for building the house and sat down with my wife, and decided I can't afford to build a house in this town. I just can't afford it. And I'm not a poor man, I'm not a rich man. But the numbers say that I can't do it. So the answer to your question is, it's a moving target and needs to be almost constantly assessed. Now, some communities like Falmouth and Yarmouth have actually dug really deep, and they've investigated exactly what a target workforce is and what affordability is based on salaries of what teachers make, of hygienists make, what educators make, and the numbers speak to most of those folks are going to be in apartments or ADUs because they won't be able to afford to buy a house. On the other hand, the migration into the state is dictating that the affordability formula for people that would qualify within those HUD guidelines, they would be houses for sale, but what they're for sale today won't be what they're for sale next spring. It just keeps moving. It just keeps moving.
So, so I guess what with the answers that I've gotten to my questions, I was originally pretty skeptical that this is actually going to achieve anything close to what we're hoping. And so I don't know whether it's worth a lot of time to follow something like this, because all it really seems to be doing is putting forth the idea that we're doing something, but in the end, I don't see how it's really going to achieve anything that we're really hoping that it would achieve, to be honest. That's my opinion.
It's a valid opinion. So my answer from select board perspective is that it's important to address this issue through an ordinance. I think that the dollar will always decide what dictates affordability. I think eventually the state is going to have to step in and say, well, it'll always need to be subsidized. It'll never be able to be on the market. You'll never be able to have affordable housing for a market. It'll always, so from select board position, we have to do what the state asks in a genuine way, not just do it to do it, in a genuine way, but say to the state, you can't change the economics of housing in Pownell. You will have to step in, or the federal government has to step in and subsidize this to make it affordable. Wood is gonna cost what wood is gonna cost. No matter what our zoning ordinance is. Builders are gonna get what they get, no matter what, but in order to be in compliance and to really address, a serious issue, I think we should, in spite of your doubts, your very valid doubts, at least make it so that we can ask the state, so we have done this. How are you going to make, how, out of your, book of magic, are you gonna make this affordable in reality? It's gonna have to be through subsidy. And that's the answer that a lot of towns, I mean, you imagine trying to, although we're not far behind from Falmouth, a couple, imagine trying to build affordable housing.
Yeah.
In Falmouth. It's just impossible. So.
Yeah.
Somebody's gonna step up and do the hard work and say, we have to figure a different economic way to house people. Can't be done in the supply side economy. I still don't think that separates us from our obligation to address the fact that there'll be many people who have grown up in Pownell that'll be priced out. And if we turn our backs on them, I don't think we're doing what's in the best interest of Pownell. It may be unachievable. Really own that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think if we want to actually address affordability piece is don't just have one housing. Yeah, I think it's fine to, in order to meet the state compliance, say we have a 2.5 density bonus for but come up with our own second tier density bonus that we think people will actually be able to use. And it could be basically like, yeah, you can build 5 lots now. We'll let you build 4 more lots. So it's 180% density bonus, but 2 of those new lots need to be affordable. So you're incentivizing, they get to build more market rate housing, but they have to include some affordable in order to actually build the market rate. And the developer will see, does that pencil out? Is it worth me doing that? Maybe it's not, but like have some incentive to, to have affordability that might actually be used.
Yeah, until we become a socialized state, the developer has no obligation to build affordable housing. So I think there'll be a whole bunch of soul searching, and I've talked to some people about towns actually bonding to build housing. It's like a social contract, but that's not capitalism. That ventures into a whole nother type of government. So, but once again, we're constrained by the state and by the comprehensive plan to have a good faith strategy. So I really agree with your comment, of everyone's comments. They're very good, and thank you for reading them. But I think we do need to at least do the best we can.
That's fair.
Is there a way we could just move this so that it applies to all subdivisions? So just place this earlier in the ordinance document so that if somebody wanted to build a four dwelling subdivision, they could have the
That would
same-
turn them into a conservation subdivision though.
Could it?
Because 4 units, if they got a density bonus, they would automatically become, more than 4 units and they would become a conservation
So it
subdivision.
would have to be 3 units in order to.
Yeah. So it makes sense, I think.
I guess the other
conservation.
thing is I'm thinking the only way to really have true affordable housing is to build like the Freeport has that mammoth apartment complex. That's, not what we're going.
Hate to say this in public, but no, I don't hate to say it. My job. The town has a fair amount of town land. So the reality is that if we do this in good faith, the town may have to decide to pony up some of that land and become partner in building it. I'm not suggesting that's even in the works, but I mean, if you try to strategize how to do this, possible to spend $1 million on a piece of land and then all of a sudden say abracadabra, affordable housing without subsidy. But since Pownell is land, say land wealthy, but has land available, that might be the avenue. I suggest that that you continue to support Tom, at least trying to get this in a concrete form and that can address some of the questions. And then we'll move from there, but
Yep, I don't have, and I don't have any problems with the language other than just my concerns about how it would all work in the real world. So, the next step would be to do what? Yeah, for sure, go ahead.
Because this is all situational, there is one mechanism that the planning board has. And by state statute, your board has full control over waiverability. Now, there may be one thing that, or more, in the ordinance that's wasn't conceived and doesn't work in a particular situation, but all other things work. Infrastructure works, workforce housing works. And all applicants have the ability to come before you, and you have the right to accept, modify, or reject any requests for waivers. And I think that gives you your best negotiation power back and forth on should there be a conservation subdivision and should this become an ordinance for the community. I personally think it's a good starting point. It doesn't create any problems, but what it does do is it brings some solutions to the table. And further solutions come from you, the board members, that can grant a waiver on something, on a particular situation. That makes sense. Orion, I think you hit the nail on the head earlier when you said, well, maybe if this is tucked back an extra 200 feet and maybe you save that cluster of old oak trees, if you're willing to pay the extra cost to build that road back in an extra 500 feet, it's going to make truly a better conservation subdivision. And yes, I think we can waive this criterion where you're in an extra 200 feet when you should be 300 feet. I think we have to look at every piece of land in a really unique way. The parcels that'll be coming up are big ones. And I truly think that it can work. Right now, it seems so, Todd, I agree with you. All your points are extremely valid. It seems kind of mysterious. How can all these pieces come together? I think they can. I think they can. And it's your power of negotiation with the applicant and talking sensibly about everything from economics to scale to ecology. They all go together. So that's my last 2 cents.
So, what should be the plan with this right now? You're bringing it to us right now. Should we consider, I mean, it would have to come before the town at some point before we could add it. And so with the goal to be, to try and get this for town meeting in June.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have to.
Right.
The public hearings are critical of the transparency and the ability to get input from everyone in town as to its purpose and then move forward from there.
So could we, I think we've had a lot of good discussions tonight about what I'm thinking, and I'm certainly open to ideas, but maybe table this for now. And then the next meeting, maybe we can work on the final, vote on a final,
You,
and then
you,
talk about,
I think strategically, you want to do some timelines so that you don't cut yourself too short for public hearings, presentations, postings. It creeps up early. I don't know what the drop dead date is, John. Do you, usually it's typically end of March, early April, that everything has to be in order for the warrant. So strategically, you'll be wanting to, I think at your next meeting, perhaps sit down with the town administrator and say, where's our timelines? Talk about those timelines and make sure that the board can achieve everything it needs to achieve. Time is short, would be my answer to it. John, you know best.
You'd want to be doing public hearings in March.
okay, okay.
You could do it at the beginning and the end of March, as both your public hearings. So that would.
The one thing that I would probably encourage you to do too is if, as I've intentionally tried to keep this surgically precise and short, but it's got a lot of detail in those 2 pages. If you feel there's advantage to the planning board, you can also add by, and it's, I don't believe it's a redundancy, to add in a proviso for waivers or waivability of portions of the conservation subdivision ordinance as you go through it, because that ordinance isn't going to apply to every single subdivision. Every single one is going to be so different and unique with those criterion that you have that provision that you can do that in the land use ordinance, but I always believe that that's a redundancy that makes a lot of sense because it makes it very clear to an applicant. And my role as your town planner, when an applicant will come in, I'll go through every single detail of that conservation subdivision, hopefully not scaring them away, but going through everything that's required. But at the same time, alerting them that if there's one little glitch in the ordinance that affects the, whether you do it or not and provide the affordable housing or not, that the opportunity is there to ask for a waiver. Perfectly legal.
So in looking at the calendar, February 19th is our February meeting, which is cutting it close for March public hearings. And then the January meeting is the 15th. So we should temporarily table it and then decide on one of those 2 meetings to have a final vote.
Sounds good. Okay. So let's move on to the subdivision, the documents for the subdivision application.
Sure.
Yes.
I just want a person coming in to have the right resources on the web. And you may remember we agreed to these planning board procedures, which basically allow us to North Star as a town. And then I doctored up the application, which basically is very little change other than having a conservation subdivision in it. And also, rather than saying the 2021 planning board subdivision set lines, I said the current ones and the current procedures, and you can find everything on the web. So I want to make it simple. So those changes
Thought it all sounded good.
and in agreement, you can just I can finalize it. If you're in agreement, I can finalize it and submit it to Tom and to our webmaster to have on the website.
Did anybody have any comments? Yes.
Do you think it's important at the very end, I crossed this that they had for planning board use only, conditions of approval, reason for denial, comments? Is it the very last page?
I wasn't too sure why.
Should I keep that in there? It seems like we're gonna have a formal document.
Right.
It depends if you want to treat this as findings of fact. In essence, it is. I would envision your first conservation subdivision plans to be extremely well documented with conditions actually on the signed plan. In addition to that, from the minutes of the meeting, I would suggest that you keep it on there. This is the first one. I know it's also got minor on there, but as a conservation subdivision, this first one has to be picture perfect. And so I think detail counts, and Marcia is the master of detail. I'd say keep it in there.
Thank you. That's all. We don't need a motion for that.
Okay, Tom, any updates?
I'm afraid I may have spoken too much tonight. In our conversation, I think that I've gone through most of the updates. I just want to reiterate the well investigation findings are will be coming forward to the select board. I'm envisioning at their December meetings. John, which meetings in December? The first Tuesday, second Tuesday?
The only meeting in December.
Okay, so I'm going to put a little pressure on Drumlin Environmental to get that report to you and their findings. The wells, a series of wells have been drilled, and we're waiting on qualitative and quantitative results from that study, and to see what our engineers recommend. Yeah. The rest of the activities that are going on in with the town planner, a lot of interesting communications from the townspeople regarding short-term rentals, the context of short-term rentals, how it would work best in the community. The first draft, and I've stressed to all of our townspeople that the first draft is nothing more than the first draft. It gets us to first base to open up the conversation. But there's been a variety of unique conversation that's gone on regarding short-term rentals. And I guess what I'd like to do is to pass the baton to Bill, because he's also been part of the conversation, just to kind of give us an update of what direction we might be heading in.
Yeah, really just a couple sentences.
Oh, yeah, thanks.
Yeah, we're working on updating the current policy, the draft policy, and the focus will be on habitability and life safety, and we will have a public hearing too. So there'll be a lot of input from a lot of people.
Well, since we're talking about it, one of the communications I got was from, Todd and I got was from Matt, St. Cyr. He sent me a markup copy.
Yes, yep,
Did you get?
yes, yep.
Okay, you have it.
Garcia, I just want you to caution you that you did turn people away saying you weren't going to talk about.
I know, and
Shouldn't talk about, it, okay?
all I said was I was gonna read the communication.
Okay, did you told all the people who turned? Okay.
And I told them that there would be public hearings, so. The communication is, I'm sending this to you as you're the only current board member I have an email address for. The draft ordinance is a piece of poop that is trying to correct a problem we don't have. Further, the murmurings seem to lend to this going in another direction besides an ordinance that is approved at town meeting. If that is the case, this is overreached by the select board. That's from Matt St. Cyr. That's all I'm going to do is read that communication.
Okay.
Just one more piece of news for the planning board. We are also working on a policy for food trucks, and we'll be formalizing that policy, and we'll have an update in 2 weeks.
Next item would be the newsletter.
Right, so I actually added a couple more communications, but the first is the newsletter. And so we're supposed to talk about what we're going to do and what we're doing. And so I think what mentioning the Bradbury was a big accomplishment, the campground expansion. And then we're working on several ordinances for public review. Watch for the agendas. I don't want to say too much more, really. And then I read the communication we got from Matt St. Cyr. We had an inquiry about membership to the planning board, and I had a discussion with that person and urged that person to submit a application. I don't know if you've gotten any applications for a new member for the planning board?
We have applications. We have not had commitment.
That's all I need to know, sir. And finally, Maine Municipal Association is having a December 10th training for planning board and zone appeals, which it's from 4 to 7:30. And I know the town will support us attending. So we are supposed to have continuous education. And I went to it before I knew what I was doing, and I think I'm going to attend again, so I know a little more what I'm doing.
Is it in person?
It's a Zoom,
Okay, cool. And what was the date again?
December 10th, 4 o'clock. So those are the communications that I've received.
If I may, Marcia, that the town is committed to that continuing education, and we'll be putting on a Freedom of Information seminar in January for all departments, so planning board. Invited and urged to attend.
Well, if we've attended one already, should we still attend another one?
It'd be great to get everybody in the town on the same page, so everyone's talking the same language. Okay? It'll be painless.
Who's the presenter and will there be smoked salmon available?
I'm glad you included the salmon after that. It will be MMA.
And the answer to the second question?
Yeah.
So we won't have a meeting in December.
We won't? Why won't we?
We will. Yeah. I thought you said that you will be the only select board.
I'm sorry, I just said the select board will only have one meeting.
Okay, got you. Sorry.
The only thing on the agenda that I know about would be publishing the new dates for next year's submittals. You may know.
And just a reminder to the board, I had mentioned it, I don't know if it's October or November, but December 18th is my wife's benchmark birthday. And so I won't be available for that meeting or else.
You're excused.
If we don't have any agenda items, doesn't mean we won't meet, because there may be things forthcoming from you. Yeah.
And if you're not gonna be at I was gonna ask if it would make sense to discuss the ordinance that we were just talking about, but if you're not gonna be here, it doesn't make sense. Wait until January. Yep. I think that's it. I moved, oh, go ahead.
I had two questions. One is, do we want to have public comment tonight? Invite anybody in the audience they have input for us?
Sure, yeah. Does anybody have any? You've sat through our extremely boring, painful hour plus. We can reward you with a couple minutes if you had some comments for the board. All right.
My other comment was just, I know staff is really busy and, and we are volunteers, but I think it would be nice if we could attempt to get the agenda posted on the Friday before the meeting, and also, even if it says a big draft across it, any of the materials we will be discussing, have that posted as well. We appreciate the folks who took the time to look at different things we are discussing and send in emails if they can't be here in person. We do read those. But I just think, it only helps our discussion if some of this material is available publicly before we're discussing it, if possible.
Well, I'll say that it's the onus of the planning board to get your material to the technology person, Jolene. She has a email address, info@powellmaine.org, prior to the time you want to put it on the website. We're currently having a labor experience in the town office, so anything that you can do yourselves would be appreciated.
I have a comment and a question. One is, if I don't hear back from people, am I allowed to just send the agenda in? Because I didn't hear from one of the people.
Secretaries are allowed to post an agenda without affirmation from the board, and please do. It's on them, whoever commented on it.
And the second thing is,
Stock and Hillary out front.
the second question is, so Orion was wondering if we should post the draft language.
Any information that.
Okay, that's okay? I'll just attach,
Absolutely,
okay.
As long as it has draft on it. It's public information. It's been presented at this meeting. It's public information.
All right, so I'm going to make that happen with you or without you.
Even if
Sounds like a
you.
song title.
All right. Anything else? No, I move that we adjourn. All in favor? Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, thank you about it. Oh, very much.